Good morning, everybody. Great to see you today. Well, today we're continuing our series, Restoring the Merry in Christmas. And last week we began with a question that philosophers, theologians, researchers, thinkers have asked for hundreds and hundreds of years. And a question that you've probably asked yourself 100 different times, and that is, what makes you happy? What is it that actually will make you happy? Like if you had it, if you could attain it, what would that be that makes you happy? And we looked last week at a man in a parable Jesus told, a man who was very wealthy, a rich man. He had a lot of resources. His net worth was exploding. His business enterprises were expanding, and he had a lot of resources and a lot of things, and yet at the same time, despite having it all, he still was not happy. And we kind of looked at this, how for this man who you would think that if material things were the key, well, he would have already achieved it, but somehow the merry was just still not his. It was out there. It was in the future. It was a someday, I really hope that I might achieve it type of thing. There it is. I can't grasp it yet. And you kind of look at this and think, wow, how do we get to this merry? Why is this so elusive? It turns out that the man had every opportunity to experiment. And even though he thought to himself, if I just tear down my old barns and build bigger ones, if I get more stuff than I already have, if I just have a little bit more, maybe that happiness will be mine. At the end of the day, he still didn't find it. It was still a down the road type of thing. And Jesus tells us this story because he wants us to rethink this idea that money and material things can actually fulfill us, complete us, and make us happy. And he says throughout the scripture and in multiple places in the New Testament that in fact this is kind of a dead end for us. Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 15, that a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. It turns out that the lives we live are way more complex than that. That there's something deeper within us that we need than just some material things to hold or handle. He goes on in Luke 4:4 to say, it is written that a man does not live on bread alone. Jesus wants to raise our consciousness about how material things are severely limited in their ability to meet our needs, that there's a deeper soul self that's not addressed by material things, and that in fact, implicit in material things is this fundamental dissatisfaction, that we always have this insatiable drive for more, and yet as we attain more, we still want more. So Jesus cautions us against this common path that you and I are always tempted to take, especially in our culture today. This idea that Madison Avenue throws out at us and Christmas commercials throw out at us over and over again of attaining more. And there's this path we're told will lead to happiness, and it begins with how we aspire. We kind of have this first point where we aspire like we're a younger person, or we're at a point in our lives like, boy, I aspire to be successful in my career. I aspire to have certain key things. I aspire to build around myself a certain type of estate that's going to fulfill me. So we aspire to something, and then we take that next step and we acquire some things. We build into our lives some of those things that we really aspire to. We have some success, and we feel like we're on the pathway to happiness, and this is a good thing and a good development for us. And yet as we acquire, we still, even at a later stage, we're still looking around and we say, wow, so-and-so is over there and got that, and they have that. And so now we step into further desire. I got to have some other stuff because, I was good and all, but it's not good enough. I need something else. And we desire, and then we're getting older and we're kind of reaching the end of our work life, and then maybe it's there, I'll just retire. And we follow the path that everybody says we should follow in hopes of finding happiness, and yet somehow it just seems still so elusive. We're striving, but we're still lacking something. There's something missing deep within our spirit. deep within our soul. And in some ways, our prosperity actually makes the problem worse. The more you have, actually, sometimes the worse things feel. The worse we feel, and in fact, happiness can be more elusive. And that's really puzzling to us. You know, researchers talk about how wealthy countries, people who live in a prosperous land, often lack joy. And those people who live in the prosperous places, well, that's us. We live in those countries. One researcher, Matt McMillan, writes this: with the advancement of science, technology, and prosperity, many expected that human happiness would proportionally increase among the peoples of the world. But research studies suggest otherwise. Today, a large number of the inhabitants of rich and affluent countries of the world are not happy. In countries like the United States and Canada, depression and suicide are actually on the rise. There should, you would think, be a proportional increase in happiness with the stuff that we acquire and have for ourselves. With our incomes, if our incomes rise, then so might our happiness, our levels of happiness, and they're finding that that actually isn't the case at all. Despite the advantages and freedoms and opportunities that material things and money give us, and they are a blessing. They can make life easier in a lot of different ways. So this can be a good thing, but they're also severely limited. They can't reach deep within our spirit. They're not the path to lasting inner peace and joy and happiness. It turns out we can't save our way or invest our way or purchase our way or travel our way to happiness. You can try all these things, but it really is not about what you hang in your closet or the car you have in the garage or what you post to Facebook. These aren't the keys to happiness in our lives. There needs to be something else. In fact, today, millions of people, just like in our culture today and us too, despite our prosperity and blessings and income and opportunities, advantages, despite all those things, millions of people are struggling with depression and uncertainty as to why they're just not fulfilled. And it's happening for one reason. They're embracing the wrong plan. They're embracing the wrong formula for happiness. And yes, you heard that right. There actually is a formula in the Bible that Jesus talks about how to achieve happiness in our lives. And in fact, it's something Jesus lays out in such a way that you and I can plan for it. We can plan to build this into our very lives. Before we get into that plan and unpack what Jesus says about that, I think it's important for us to see first that happiness is not about possessions, but it's a pathway that always involves people. A starting point for getting into this and understanding how happiness can be something we experience in this life in a greater way, to a greater degree than we have in the past, is to see that happiness is not rooted in our possessions. It's rooted in people. It always involves people. Now, some people don't believe that. Some people don't believe that it has anything to do with people. Guys, for example, will say, you know, I don't really need anybody. That's a common thing. I don't really need anybody. I just kind of do my thing. And yet when they say that, a lot of times they're not taking into account that they do have meaningful relationships with other people. But they're just not noticing that in their calculation and in their statement that they're making. But a lot of times it can also come down to this point where, you know, maybe we've tried. You know, we're a guy, we've tried to have a relationship with somebody and it hasn't worked out, so I just kind of gave up. And we give up, and yet other people would look at us and say, you know, it is affecting you. We don't want to see it maybe or admit it, but it affects us. Other people see it, but we don't. And I think it comes down to this, that every single person on the planet has a relational core. You have a relational core. You're made to have relationships with other people. God created you with that desire for relationships because God himself has a relational core. That God existed through all time and eternity, God has always been in this three forms, in God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They enjoyed perfect fellowship and communion together. But God, in his ever-reaching self and goodness, wants to involve others. He wants to pour his goodness into others and have relationships with others. And so that's where we've come from. God wants a relationship with us. He wants to bless us. He wants the interactions that come from that relationship. And we're made in his image. We're wired. Our DNA is set up in such a way that relationships are our core. This is what we are about. And this relational core is revealed in multiple ways. There's evidence of it everywhere. I think the first way we see it is that some of the happiest people have few material goods. Some of the happiest people you will meet have very few material goods at all. I noticed this when I did a mission trip to Africa. A few years ago, I was asked to be a mission speaker at a regional missionary conference in Zimbabwe, and I was asked to go. And so I went to 3 different countries, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And we traveled around, and we went to villages, we went to cities, we went and visited people in the bush, like in the middle of nowhere. We visited hospitals. It was really an impactful time for me. And when I was there, it was very much culture shock, like big time culture shock. And it showed up in a variety of ways, but one of the ways was just kind of a simple thing in that how grueling it was to travel from place to place. Like seriously difficult to get from point A to point B. So we would want to go just a short distance, but the roads were absolutely a disaster. I mean, talk about potholes. I mean, in February, we're going to be calling pothole patrols or something because, like, there's a pothole in Pennsylvania somewhere, and we're like, we got to fill that baby in. And they're like, man, that's nothing compared to these huge, holes in the ground when you're trying on a highway to get from place to place. So you kind of go down the highway like this for hours and hours, and man, it just took a lot out of you. Take it for granted so easily. I also noticed in terms of the culture that the women worked really hard just to survive. And I say that it was the women because I don't know what the men were doing. I didn't see the men doing any work ever, really. I don't know what they were doing. Were they hanging out in their huts? I don't know. But the women, they were working. And I would see them over and over again on the highways, then along the country roads, carrying water jugs on their heads. They didn't have plumbing. They didn't just turn the faucet on and say, man, I need a drink. Boy, am I thirsty, man. I got to brush my teeth. No, they didn't do that. They had to go get the water in some lake or stream and bring it back. Other women were also walking on these highways and these country roads and pathways through, dirt roads, and they were carrying sticks, huge bundles of sticks in their arms. And what they were doing is they were going to the forests. They were collecting sticks so that they could basically boil their water, so they could eat their food, so they could take care of their family and keep their family safe. Again, I don't know what the men were doing, but the women were working hard just to survive. You go to the churches, and they would sit on 2x4s with bricks. They didn't have the comfy seats, that we have. And you kind of look at all this. If they were lucky, if they were fortunate, if they were kind of in the top, like 10% or so, they might even have a hut with a 4x8 size yard. And they'd grow some vegetables, lettuce or other things. They'd protect that carefully, too, because they didn't want anybody to take it. And so it was very different than anything I was used to. And I also noticed something, too, that the people, despite having so little, were really quite happy. Very happy. Not everybody. We can't idealize people, idealize situations like that. But the truth is, people were mainly happy. And so you'd go to the churches, and there was exuberant worship. There was praise. It was dynamic. It was energetic. I went to a wedding, so much joy, and people smiled. And you look at all these kind of things, and you're like, wow, they have so little, but they're so happy. Because it turns out that happiness has never been rooted in their stuff at all. It was much more about the willingness to invest. They took the time to invest in their relationships. Their joy was rooted in their friendships and connections with other human beings. They took the time to invest in those relationships. They paid attention to their relational core, something we're not really good at because we're running here, running there, running all over the place, saving money, going on Amazon, getting stuff to, it's like we don't even connect with people anymore. But they paid attention to that relational core. They were people who valued community, and it brought them great joy. They were a happy people. I think our relational core also shows up in our struggles. The struggles that you and I have, the struggles that we face in this life. I think one of them is first the struggle with infertility. Infertility is something that is a big, big challenge. And some of you have faced it and are facing it and working through it. And I know a lot of people, I've had a lot of friends over the years who have had to work through that. And it doesn't matter what kind of car we drive. It doesn't matter what kind of countertops we have. We want to have a child. And when we cannot, that's very, very difficult. And so we would put all that and just throw it all someone's way and put out lots of money. And I know I've had friends who've adopted and have worked through that, paying a lot of money to make that happen because we want more than anything else to love another person. There's something about that is just intrinsic within our spirit and our DNA. We want to give ourselves to another person because that's what God did. God was exactly the same way. He could have existed forever in the permanence and perfection of the Trinity, but he didn't want to do that. He wanted to give. He's a self-giving God. We want to give. And we also would love if that child would reciprocate. We love that when they smile and they kind of interact with us and like, oh, okay, all that crying last night, this was worth it. Because we are wired for those kind of connections and relationships. Our fulfillment is linked to a who in our lives, not a what. I think we also see this relational core in our struggle with estrangement. We want to be connected with others, and when that doesn't happen, that's really hard. When we want to have somebody in our life and they're not in our lives and they're not sitting at our table, despite our attempts and our hopes at reconciliation to work through things, that's painful. It hurts. A lot of times we go through our lives and we find a friendship just fractures, a marriage blows up. We just kind of have a falling out with somebody. And we want it to be different. We'd like it to be better. And when it's not, estrangement, it shows that relationships matter and it's hard. Disappointment over the color watch band we got under the tree. Material stuff, man, that's nothing compared to how it can hurt when a relationship is strained. We also see our relational core in what we value at the end of our lives. What are you going to value at the end of your life? What do people value at the end of their lives? That says something about our DNA. That says something about who we are. And so we're not going to be saying, honey, can you please go home? I'm in the hospital. I'm about to die. Can you please go home and get my toy trains and get those Cole Haan boots, okay, and bring them to the hospital because I just want to hold them one more time. Honey, can you go home and can you get my rare coin collection and can you bring it into the hospital and I'm laying on my hospital bed and just pour it on my hospital bed and pour it on top of me so I can feel the metal against my skin just one more time. We're not going to say that. Are we going to say, honey, can you wheel me out to the parking lot? I just need a few moments alone with my car. Just a few moments. I just want to say goodbye. No, we're not going to do any of those things. We're going to basically want people around us, people that we've invested in, people that we're hoping will show up in our lives and we want to show up in our lives and that we've loved over time to gather. My neighbor this past summer, Rich, who lives in Hershey right next door to me, he passed away And Rich had a really great day the day before he died. He had a situation where he was very conscious, he was alert, he wasn't really dealing with pain, but he was going to die, and he died the next day. And he had a really great day for one reason, because a lot of people started showing up in his room and visited him. He had a steady parade of people that came in and said, "Thank you for being my teacher for all those years." He was a teacher. "Thank you for this," or "Remember that story when we did this and when we did that?" And they told the stories, and it was just a great day, and it was exhausting because he wasn't well and he was dying. But it was a great day and a great encouragement to him and his family and his loved ones and his kids, because everyone gathered around, and the relationships are what matter in the end. That's what we value more than any stuff or things we acquire. The one last way our relational core shows up is by what we regret at the end of our lives. Like, what do we regret when it's all said and done? We're not going to say, "Man, I really regret, getting that Canon PowerShot camera when I could have had the Nikon D700. I mean, that was way better. What was I thinking? That's so stupid. It's the stupidest thing ever. Why did I get the Craftsman lawnmower? I should have got the Toro Zero Turn. That would have made my life so much better. I would have been happier, more fulfilled." I lost it. I haven't lived. I haven't even lived. No, we're not going to be talking about regrets. Our regrets are not going to be possessional. They're going to be relational. And so we're going to be thinking about, wow, my relationships, we're going to regret, not working harder to try to repair that damaged relationship. We're going to regret not having a conversation that we should have had. We'll regret not mailing that letter we wrote out, but we never sent. Our regrets are going to be more on the relational side of things than the possessional things. Not forgiving someone, not spending more time with someone. The relationships, in the end, by what we regret, tell us that we have that relational core. And so as we think about all these different things, all these core pieces of who we are, and all these seminal moments of our lives point to our relational nature, the importance of our connections with others. So we might expect that if all that is true, that our happiness in this life would likewise be linked to our relationships. And in fact, it is directly linked to our relationships. Ultimately, happiness is about people. And this means something really vital for you and me. Because if happiness is about people and not possessions, this means that we need to take very seriously how we handle those relationships, how we respond to those relationships, how we deal with those relationships, because in our dealing with other people, our happiness is actually at stake. And what's interesting is that Jesus himself deals with this whole idea of how we can interact in such a way that we do restore the merry to our lives, the merry to Christmas, but even beyond that, find happiness that we're craving. And we learn from one of the most important passages in the Bible about this topic of happiness. It's found in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Jesus actually talks about a subject that thousands of years later we're talking about again today. And surprisingly, he gives us a formula for happiness that we can follow, and we can plan to make it happen. The passage is found in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 through 12. Now, when he saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This section of the Bible is called the Beatitudes, and it's actually the introduction to Jesus' very first and most detailed sermon in the entire Bible. Powerful, powerful teaching in Matthew 5 through 7. And Jesus is at this point where he has just started his ministry, and he's known primarily as a miracle worker. Jesus, the miracle worker. In other words, word about Jesus has gotten out that he's healing people. He's delivering people. People who couldn't walk are now able to walk. People who are blind can see. So he's doing these miracles, and word is spreading like wildfire all through the region, through Judea and Perea and Jerusalem, the whole area, Galilee, everybody's hearing about Jesus. And they're like, you know what? Road trips, like seriously, we're going to go find this guy and we're going to track him down because I got to see this miracle worker, this guy named Jesus. And so huge crowds of people start following him. They're pursuing him, and they kind of catch up to him at this mountain. And he sees this crowd. He calls his disciples to himself, and in the overhearing of the disciples and the crowd, he begins to talk about a subject that is relevant to every single hearer. He begins to talk about a subject and answer a question that every single human being there and every one of us today is asking. What does it take to be happy? What do happy people do? What do happy people look like? Jesus addresses that very question. Do you think people were ready to hear something? You think you could hear a pin drop? I bet. And he begins by talking about this word, blessed. Happy is the translation. The word in the Greek is makarios. Happy are those who do certain things. 9 different times he uses the word blessed, makarios. Happy are those who do certain things. And he begins in verse 3. Happy are those, blessed are the poor in spirit. He begins, blessed are, happy are the people who are poor in spirit. Now, first of all, we need to say what this is not. Poor in spirit doesn't mean that we've got a glum, depressed spirituality. Oh, that's not what this is about. Glum, depressed, it's the spirituality of the frown. Like if you frown, you are way closer to God than anybody who would ever smile. Okay, that's not what it's saying here. And if you think that's extreme or weird, I've gotten, years ago, I used to get stuff in the mail, and I was in Lancaster County, and they'd say, big celebration, rejoice, the Lord is good, and they'd show a picture of people, and they're all like frowning. Like, rejoice, you look like you're dying, like seriously, or you're constipated. Something is wrong that you don't look very happy. Like if there's joy in your heart, it's seriously not showing up on your face. Like, shouldn't it? Shouldn't it? And so it's not, Jesus isn't talking about the spirituality of the frown here. He's not talking about material things either, that we, poor, poverty related to material things. No, he's actually talking about a humble acknowledgement of God and a willing dependence on God. That's what it means to be poor in spirit, to humbly acknowledge God and willingly depend on God. Poor in spirit speaks of the humility that you and I are to embrace, where we trust him, we place our confidence in him, not in our stuff and not in ourselves. And when we humbly acknowledge him and put our trust in him and depend on him, do you know what happens when we take that step? It's actually a huge relief. It's an absolutely huge relief. Because when we make ourselves the center of the universe, when everything that happens in my life is about me, I'm then responsible for every outcome. It makes me responsible for every outcome. When I take God out of the picture, when I put myself at the center of the universe, I'm the CEO of all this. I'm now responsible for every outcome in my marriage, every outcome in my kids' life, everything that happens with my career, everything that happens with my health. It's all dependent on me. It all rests on me. But here's the thing. If you have kids, you can control and guide them when they're 5 years old, but when they're 25, 20 years old, you're like, man, they're making their own decision. You can say all day long, bad idea. You can model it, you can guide them, you can point them in the right direction, you can do all the right things, but in the end, they make their decisions, and that's hard for a parent who wants their kid to make that right choice and maybe sees them kind of getting up close to the guardrail, a little close to the cliff. That's hard. And so if we don't have anything bigger than ourselves to rely on or to turn to, that can be straining, stressful. It can break us. It does break us. And so if we're not the poor in spirit, but rather the proud in spirit, if this is all about me, then all of a sudden, I've got a lot of responsibility and things weigh heavy on me. The self-orientation that life becomes of being proud in spirit doesn't make our lives better. It makes them more stressful than ever before. But when we're poor in spirit, when we tap into God's greater power, when we're dependent on Him, it actually gives us confidence. It gives us strength. It taps into wisdom. It gives us power we would not have had we not expressed that dependence on Him. And in the end, it actually is the foundation, that poor in spirit, that humility and dependence on God, it shows up in our relationships. It makes them better too. Jesus goes on to say in verse 4, happy are those, blessed are those who mourn. Really? Blessed, happy are those who mourn. We look at that and say, how can that be? It seems so counterintuitive. And yet, someone who mourns is actually someone who is alive. Like their heart is alive. It means that they are actually emotionally connected with other people. It's a sign of health when we mourn. When we cry with those who cry, we mourn with those who mourn, we grieve with those who grieve. It shows that we're alive. We're not dead. We don't have a stone for a heart. And it shows we're emotionally connected and we can enter into other people's lives. And we can actually undergird them and lift them and pray for them and cry with them and sit with them and be silent just supporting them. That's a sign of health, of emotional strength. It also speaks, I think, of this idea that mourning reminds us that life is difficult, that it's fleeting, but we have hope. Mourning reminds us of the reality of this life. You see, in our culture, we make a big mistake because we don't know what to do with death itself. And so what we do with death is we sanitize it. We sanitize it and we try to, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about it. If somebody dies and a friend or whatever, we'll go to the funeral, we'll say a couple words, and listen, I got to get out of there. I got to get back to my life. I got to move on. I got to move on. I just can't keep focused on it. But here's the truth. Your life and my life are bookended. Your life and my life, we have bookends. You got a starting point because you're here right now, so we know that. But here's the thing. I hope that you eat great grains, and I hope that you go to the gym and that you reduce your salt intake. So maybe your bookend moves a little bit this way or that way. I hope you could do that, But you got bookends, and you got a beginning, and you have an end. And when we are people who are emotionally connected with the realities of life, the struggles, the pain that you've gone through, I've gone through, and we will go through, and we're emotionally connected with other people, mourning can actually be a blessing. It can lead to joy that is unexpected because it enables us to actually help another person. There's joy in helping another person. Your pain is not in vain. You can help another person. It also helps us focus on our hope. That in fact, yes, this life is difficult. Yes, it's disappointing. Yes, there are times where like, I don't believe this happened. This is so hard. And yet we do not mourn as those without hope. And we bring that hope into our everyday life. And suddenly it dawns on us, God is taking care of us, our loved ones, and the people around us. And that gives us something unexpected, joy in the midst of our struggle. Happy, verse 5, are those who are meek. Again, happy are those who are meek. Really, I don't know. No one raises their kids, and their son to say, I just hope you grow up to be a meek one. I just hope you be a nice little meek little guy. And if we knew what it meant, we would pray that prayer. Because meekness is not weakness. Meekness is actually true power. If there's something you want your son or your kid or your son-in-law or whatever to be, as a guy in our culture especially, you want to pray for meekness because that's inner strength and power that transcends the circumstances. In other words, the circumstances are this way, but I have an inner strength and a decision and an inner confidence to choose the right thing despite the weather conditions, the difficulties, or the pressures on me. In other words, I'm tough not on the outside because I can throw a fist at you, but I'm tough on the inside because I persevere and I trust God. I put my confidence in Him. I think a lot of times today, we have this idea that we want to be not meek, but rather, the center of attention. We want to be the center of attention. And so we kind of gauge our lives based on, how many followers we have, how many likes we have on Facebook, how many posts we had that get a certain type of response. We want people's attention. We want people's attention. We bust into conversations because we want people to think we're fun and maybe flamboyant. And yet when we get the focus off ourselves, when we know that God's love is so real that we can just be ourselves, it actually stabilizes our world. It stabilizes our world when we know how loved we are by God, how valued we are. My valuation comes from Him, not from a fickle crowd. The crowd one day loves you, the next day they hate you. One day you got public opinion and opinions of this doing, saying this, next day, and it's like, I'm on a roller coaster. No, I'm not on a roller coaster because I got a meek spirit. I have an inner confidence that comes from the valuation God gives me. And that is not subject to winds. It's not subject to winds. And it enables me to respond to people in a way that is healthier, that's not counterattacking, that's not self-defensive, that's not out of my pride. No, I can respond because God comes into my life and He gives me the strength, confidence. And this, once again, does what we really are hoping. It relieves our stress. We're not as strained. I don't have to compete. I don't have to compare. I don't have to measure up. I can be myself because God puts such a high valuation on my life. And that is liberating. And that, again, leads to the day when it dawns on us, man, I'm actually feeling kind of happy about all that. We don't have time today to look at the rest of the passage, and I think at some point we will, because I think the Beatitudes are really powerful, and there's a lot more here. But I think the bottom line is we looked at through the rest of the passage, it takes us in the same direction. Hungering for God, showing mercy, having a pure heart, being a peacemaker. These are relational concepts. Even to the point where we want to respond to difficult situations, those who persecute us in the right way. To be blessed. We're blessed, happy when we get persecuted, and you're like, that can't be. But when God comes into the picture and says, listen, you do the right thing, and that is going to give you a joy. Even in your interactions with people, you just don't even like. You don't even like them. They don't like you. But that doesn't change your orientation. I'm going to do what God asked me to do, have the heart to respond the right way. The bottom line in all of this is that the formula for happiness is clear. that we can restore the Mary into our lives and the Mary into our Christmas. And I think we can say it this way. Happiness is an outcome, the result of living a certain kind of life, of sowing God-honoring responses towards the people and circumstances in our lives and reaping over time God's favor. Happiness is an outcome, the result of living a certain kind of life. Happiness actually is about sowing and reaping over time, trusting God and allowing Him to pour His favor out in our lives. Now, I had hoped to make this bullet really succinct. I really tried. So what I want to do is break this down because I didn't want to eliminate any of this. So I want to break it down. Happiness is an outcome. Happiness is not immediately accessible. It's not immediately accessible. You're not going to go out there and go buy some for you. Now, you may take Route 39 down to Hershey and see the big sign there on the road that says, Tanger Outlets, your happy place. I mean, have you seen that? So it's my happy place. But when you go to the Tanger Outlets and somebody cuts you off because you were at the parking spot first, but they kind of cut in line, no, Tanger Outlets is my angry place, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. So in other words, okay, and maybe it's happy for a minute. I get something really cool and I bring it home and it's not happy anymore. But I drove past the billboard and it said it would be, I'll go back. Like what do we just keep doing this? But happiness, you can't purchase it. It's not immediately accessible. It's actually something that happens through the process of sowing and reaping over time. And so in other words, you are actually a farmer. You're a farmer. And so you take a seed and you sow it and say, I am going to sow this seed that God wants me. I'm going to be meek. I'm going to be poor in spirit. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to do these things, God. And I'm going to sow this seed in my marriage. I'm going to sow this. That's what God wants you to do. Sow the seed in your marriage. But this is what happens to us. We sow the seed in our lives or our marriage. And you know what we say? We say, okay, I sowed the seed. Where is it? Where's the green stuff? Like, where's the crop? I just sowed it. We're like, come on, it's not working. This is ridiculous. I mean, how many times do I got to wait? Like, how many days and hours? I sowed the seed, and God's saying, wait a minute, you sowed the seed, but you have to be patient. You have to persevere, not give up. If you look at a farm and a farmer, he sows the seeds. Does he come out the next day and say, where's my corn? No, he's got dirt. It's still dirt. But then one day, he walks out, and then there's like this green something or other going on. It's like a carpet, and you're like, whoa, oh, seriously, this is germinating. And then, boom, there's a crop. And so this idea, I'm a farmer, I'm going to sow a seed into that difficult relationship. That person I don't even like, but I'm going to respond in a Christ-honoring way over time. Not just one time, but multiple times. It's going to be part of my process. I'm not giving up. Sow that seed. It's going to germinate one day. Sow that seed in your career. Sow that seed in your finances. You say, I've given to God. I've been faithful. I've been trying to work with this person, this relationship, whatever it might be. And like, nothing's happening. And God's saying, it's a process. Over time, be patient, persevere. Don't give up doing the right thing, and you'll see a harvest. It'll dawn on you that you are actually experiencing God's favor, that you're happy. See, this gives us hope. If you're not happy, it's because basically the process of sowing and reaping has played a role. You see, we reap today what we've sowed yesterday. We sow and reap our way to unhappiness. I've made that mistake. I've done it, and you have too. Done certain things. It's like, man, I've sabotaged my own happiness. I could blame the world. I could curse the darkness. Guess what, man? I hate the mirror. Oh, I hate that thing. Truth is, we sow and reap unhappiness, but because it's a process, we could turn it around and sow and reap differently. And that changes everything. And so today, I want to ask you today, what kind of seed are you sowing in your marriage, You say, I'm trying to be Christ-like, but man, they're a pain. This is difficult. This is challenging. And it's like, you're not going to get a result in a day. It's a process. Keep sowing. You say, I'm trying to sow faithfulness in my relationships, and I'm trying to do the right thing with a coworker. That's a real challenge. And keep sowing. What kind of seed are you sowing in the lives of even the difficult people around you today? I want to encourage you to see happiness in a new light. It's not something you can just access by reading a book or, having an experience or going on a trip or buying something at Tanger Outlets. You're not going to purchase it on Amazon. But when you sow and reap over time, you will be blessed. So go. Just go and sow God's way and wait patiently for what he is about to do. Let's pray.